Elena Petrov stepped off the military transport truck, her weathered rifle case slung across her shoulder. The case had seen better days. Its leather was cracked, the metal corners dented from countless deployments. Around her, the bustling army base came alive with the sounds of soldiers preparing for another day of training and operations. At 28, Elena had already served in 3 different conflict zones, but her appearance didn't immediately command respect. She stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with short auburn hair tucked neatly under her military cap. Her uniform was clean but showed the wear of someone who had spent more time in the field than behind a desk. What most people noticed first wasn't her military bearing, but the way she carried herself with quiet confidence that seemed almost out of place among the louder, more boisterous soldiers around her. Lieutenant Marcus Thompson was conducting his morning inspection of new arrivals when he spotted Elena walking toward the barracks. At 32, Thompson had worked his way up through the ranks and prided himself on being able to assess a soldier's capabilities at first glance. He had commanded respect through his commanding presence and vocal leadership style, and he expected the same level of intensity from everyone under his command. As Elena approached the check-in station, Thompson's eyes immediately fell on her rifle case. He had seen hundreds of weapons containers over his military career, and this one looked like it belonged in a museum rather than on an active military base. The leather was so worn it had taken on a grayish color, and one of the brass buckles had been replaced with what appeared to be a makeshift wire fastener. Thompson stepped forward, blocking Elena's path to the registration desk. His voice carried across the immediate area, drawing the attention of nearby soldiers who were going about their morning routines. The volume and tone were clearly intended to make an example out of what he perceived as substandard equipment maintenance. Elena stopped and turned to face the lieutenant, her expression remaining neutral despite the attention his loud voice had drawn. She had encountered officers like Thompson before, those who judged soldiers based on appearances rather than abilities. She knew that her worn equipment and quiet demeanor often led to assumptions about her competence, but she had learned long ago that actions spoke louder than words. Thompson circled around Elena, making a show of inspecting her gear while continuing his commentary about military standards. Other soldiers had begun to gather, some watching with amusement, others with sympathy for the new arrival, who was receiving such a public dressing down on her first day at the base. The lieutenant's inspection continued as he pointed out every scuff, every worn edge, every sign of use on Elena's equipment. He questioned how someone could expect to serve effectively with gear that looked like it had survived multiple wars. His voice grew louder as he warmed to his subject, clearly enjoying the audience he had attracted. Elena remained silent throughout the inspection, her hands at her sides, her expression unchanged. She had learned that responding to such challenges often only escalated the situation, and she preferred to let her performance speak for itself when the opportunity arose. She knew that her rifle case told a story that the lieutenant couldn't read just by looking at its exterior. The case had been with her through every deployment, every mission, every moment when her life and the lives of others had depended on her accuracy and skill. The wear marks weren't signs of neglect. They were evidence of constant use, of a weapon that had been maintained and cared for even in the most challenging conditions imaginable. As Thompson continued his verbal assault, Elena's mind wandered to her last deployment, where that same worn rifle case had contained the weapon that had saved the lives of an entire platoon, pinned down by enemy fire. She remembered the weight of the rifle in her hands, the familiar feel of the scope against her eye, and the steady breath she had taken before making the shot that changed everything. The gathering crowd of soldiers began to murmur among themselves, some clearly uncomfortable with the lieutenant's harsh treatment of the new arrival. They could see that Elena was maintaining her composure admirably, but they also recognized that Thompson was not finished with his demonstration of authority. Thompson concluded his inspection by demanding to know how Elena expected to serve alongside professional soldiers when she couldn't even maintain her equipment to basic standards. He suggested that perhaps she would be better suited to a support role rather than any position that required actual combat readiness. Elena finally spoke, her voice calm and measured. She simply stated that she was ready to demonstrate her capabilities whenever the lieutenant felt it would be appropriate. Her response was polite, but carried an undertone that suggested she was not intimidated by his aggressive approach. The lieutenant paused, somewhat taken aback by her composed response. He had expected either anger or submission, but Elena's quiet confidence threw him off balance. He looked at her more carefully for the first time, noting the way she stood, the steadiness of her gaze, and something in her eyes that he couldn't quite identify. However, Thompson's pride was now invested in the confrontation, and backing down in front of the assembled soldiers was not an option he was willing to consider. He decided to escalate the situation, announcing that Elena would have an opportunity to prove herself on the shooting range that very afternoon. He made it clear that he expected her performance to match her apparent confidence, and that failure would result in immediate reassignment to duties more suited to her capabilities. Word of the afternoon shooting challenge spread quickly through the base. Soldiers who had witnessed the morning confrontation began sharing details with their unit members, and soon everyone was talking about the new arrival who had been publicly challenged by Lieutenant Thompson. The story grew with each telling, and by lunchtime, Elena had become the subject of considerable speculation and interest. Some soldiers expressed sympathy for Elena, feeling that Thompson had been unnecessarily harsh in his public criticism. They recognized that first impressions could be misleading, and they had seen enough combat to know that experience often came disguised in unexpected packages. Others sided with the lieutenant, believing that military standards existed for good reasons and that soldiers who couldn't maintain their equipment properly had no business in combat roles. Elena spent the hours before the shooting test quietly preparing. She found a secluded area behind the barracks where she could open her rifle case without attracting attention. As she lifted the lid, the contrast between the case's worn exterior and its precisely organized contents became immediately apparent. Every component was perfectly maintained, each piece of equipment secured in its designated spot with military precision. Her rifle was a custom-modified weapon that had been carefully adapted for long-range precision shooting. The scope was a high-end piece of equipment that cost more than most soldiers made in several months. The barrel showed signs of meticulous care, and every moving part operated with the smoothness that came from constant maintenance and expert knowledge. This was clearly the weapon of someone who understood that their life might depend on its performance. Elena began her preparation ritual, a series of checks and adjustments that she had performed hundreds of times before. She inspected every component, verified the scope's calibration, and ran through the mental checklist that had become second nature over years of deployment. Her movements were economical and precise, showing the muscle memory that came from countless hours of practice and real-world application. As she worked, Elena reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. She had grown up in a small farming community where hunting was a necessity, rather than a sport. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 12 years old, emphasizing accuracy over speed, patience over aggression. Those early lessons had shaped her approach to marksmanship and had served as the foundation for everything that followed. Her military career had begun almost by accident. Elena had enlisted primarily for the educational benefits and job training, with no particular interest in combat roles. However, her exceptional performance during basic training had caught the attention of her instructors, particularly her scores on the shooting range. She consistently outperformed soldiers with years more experience, and her natural ability was impossible to ignore. The transition to specialized sniper training had been challenging in ways that went beyond the technical requirements. Elena had to overcome the skepticism of instructors who questioned whether someone of her size and apparent gentleness could handle the psychological demands of precision shooting in combat situations. She had proven them wrong through dedication, skill, and an inner toughness that wasn't immediately apparent from her exterior. Her first deployment had been to a mountainous region where insurgent activity made every patrol a potential life-or-death situation. Elena had been assigned to provide overwatch for infantry units, using her long-range capabilities to identify and neutralize threats before they could engage the soldiers she was protecting. The challenging terrain and difficult shooting conditions had tested every aspect of her training. It was during that first deployment that Elena had earned the respect of the soldiers she served alongside. Her ability to make accurate shots at extreme distances, often under adverse weather conditions and intense pressure, had saved lives and changed the outcome of several engagements. The worn appearance of her rifle case was a direct result of those missions. where equipment was exposed to sand, rain, extreme temperatures, and the constant stress of combat operations. Elena's reputation had grown with each deployment. Commanders specifically requested her services for the most challenging missions, and soldiers felt more confident knowing she was providing overwatch. Her quiet professionalism and deadly accuracy had made her something of a legend among those who had served with her, though she never sought recognition or publicity for her accomplishments. The insignia that would soon shock Lieutenant Thompson was earned during her second deployment, in a situation that had tested every aspect of her training and experience. Elena had been positioned on a mountainside, providing cover for a patrol that had become pinned down by enemy fire from multiple positions. The shot she had made that day was at the absolute limit of her weapon's effective range, in challenging wind conditions, with the lives of 12 soldiers hanging in the balance. As Elena finished her preparation, she carefully packed her rifle back into its case. The afternoon sun was beginning to cast long shadows across the base, and she knew that the time for the shooting demonstration was approaching. She had no intention of showing off or humiliating Lieutenant Thompson, but she also would not hold back when it came to demonstrating her capabilities. The shooting range was located on the far side of the base, a sprawling facility with targets set at various distances to accommodate different types of training. Elena had visited it briefly during her initial orientation, noting the layout and the maximum distances available for long-range shooting. She was pleased to see that the range offered targets at distances that would allow her to demonstrate her true capabilities. As Elena made her way toward the range, she noticed that word of the challenge had spread even further than she had expected. Soldiers were moving in the same direction, clearly planning to witness the afternoon's entertainment. She realized that what had started as a simple confrontation between herself and the lieutenant had evolved into something much larger, with her reputation and future assignments potentially hanging in the balance. The shooting range was more crowded than Elena had expected when she arrived carrying her worn rifle case. What had started as a simple challenge between her and Lieutenant Thompson had apparently become the afternoon's main entertainment. Soldiers from various units had gathered, creating an informal gallery of spectators who lined the observation area behind the firing line. Lieutenant Thompson was already present, speaking with the range safety officer and gesturing toward the targets set at various distances. Elena could see him pointing to specific target positions, apparently discussing the parameters for the shooting demonstration. His voice carried an air of authority as he explained the situation to the range officer, clearly positioning himself as the expert who would be evaluating her performance. Elena approached the check-in table and signed the required paperwork for range use. The range safety officer, a grizzled sergeant with over 20 years of service, looked at her equipment with professional interest rather than the dismissive attitude she had encountered from Thompson. He had seen enough combat veterans to know that appearances could be deceiving, and he maintained a neutral expression as he reviewed the safety protocols. Thompson announced to the assembled crowd that they were about to witness a demonstration of whether modern military standards were being properly maintained. He made it clear that he expected Elena's performance to reflect the condition of her equipment, implying that both would be found wanting. His comments drew some supportive nods from soldiers who respected his rank and experience, while others remained quietly skeptical. Elena requested permission to inspect the range and identify suitable targets for her demonstration. The range safety officer granted her request, and she walked methodically down the firing line, studying the various target options available. The range extended to a maximum distance of 800 meters, with targets placed at intervals starting from 100 meters. Most soldiers trained primarily on targets within 300 meters, as this covered the majority of engagement distances they would encounter in typical combat situations. However, Elena's attention was focused on the targets at the far end of the range, where the challenges of wind drift, bullet drop, and target identification became significant factors in shooting accuracy. As Elena examined the distant targets, Lieutenant Thompson called out suggestions about appropriate target selection for someone with her apparent skill level. He recommended starting with closer targets to build confidence before attempting more challenging shots. His tone suggested that he was being generous in allowing her to work up to more difficult challenges gradually. Elena politely acknowledged Thompson's suggestions but continued her methodical examination of the range. She was noting wind indicators, studying the terrain between the firing position and the targets, and calculating the various factors that would affect her shooting. To the casual observer, it might have looked like she was stalling or trying to avoid the challenge, but experienced marksmen in the crowd recognized her behavior as the systematic preparation of a serious shooter. The range safety officer called for attention and began explaining the safety protocols that would govern the demonstration. All spectators were required to remain behind the designated safety line. Eye and ear protection was mandatory, and the range would be declared hot once shooting began. Elena listened carefully, though she was clearly familiar with standard range procedures. Thompson took the opportunity to address the crowd again, explaining that they were about to see whether military equipment standards were merely suggestions or actual requirements for effective service. He emphasized that the military's reputation depended on maintaining high standards across all aspects of soldier performance. From equipment maintenance to shooting accuracy, Elena began unpacking her rifle, drawing curious looks from the assembled soldiers. As she opened the worn case, several spectators moved closer to get a better view of the weapon inside. The contrast between the case's exterior condition and the pristine rifle it contained was immediately apparent to anyone with military experience. Her rifle was clearly a precision instrument, modified and customized for long-range accuracy. The scope alone was worth more than most soldiers' monthly salary, and the barrel modifications were the work of a skilled gunsmith who understood the demands of precision shooting. Several experienced marksmen in the crowd exchanged knowing looks as they recognized the quality of Elena's equipment. Thompson's confident expression faltered slightly as he observed Elena's weapon, but he quickly recovered and suggested that expensive equipment couldn't compensate for inadequate training or poor fundamentals. He pointed out that real military effectiveness came from discipline and practice, not from fancy gear that might impress civilians but would fail under combat conditions. Elena completed her rifle assembly with practiced efficiency, each movement precise and purposeful. She attached the scope, checked the bolt action, and performed a series of safety checks that demonstrated her familiarity with the weapon. Her preparation was thorough but economical, showing the efficiency that came from years of performing the same routine under various conditions. The range safety officer called for the range to go hot, and Elena approached the firing line. She selected a shooting position at the 800-meter mark, the maximum distance available on the range. This choice drew murmurs from the crowd, as most soldiers rarely attempted shots at such distances, and many considered it an unrealistic challenge for a demonstration. Thompson loudly questioned Elena's target selection, suggesting that she was setting herself up for failure by attempting shots beyond her actual capabilities. He recommended that she start with more reasonable distances and work her way up to longer shots if her initial performance warranted it. His tone suggested that he was trying to save her from public embarrassment. Elena calmly explained that she preferred to demonstrate her actual capabilities rather than waste time on targets that didn't represent realistic challenges. Her response was matter-of-fact, without arrogance or defensiveness, but it clearly indicated that she considered 800-meter shots to be within her normal operating parameters. The crowd grew quieter as Elena settled into her shooting position. Even the skeptics recognized that the moment of truth was approaching, and the outcome would either vindicate Thompson's harsh assessment or provide a dramatic reversal of expectations. Elena's calm confidence was beginning to affect the atmosphere, and some spectators were starting to wonder if they were about to witness something extraordinary. Elena settled into her shooting position with a fluidity that immediately caught the attention of experienced marksmen in the crowd. Her stance was textbook perfect, but more importantly, it was natural and relaxed. She adjusted her rifle rest with minimal movements, each tiny correction purposeful and precise. The transformation from the quiet soldier who had been publicly criticized to the focused professional, now behind the rifle, was striking. Lieutenant Thompson continued his commentary, pointing out to nearby soldiers that proper shooting form was just the beginning of effective marksmanship. He emphasized that hitting targets on a controlled range was vastly different from performing under the stress and chaos of actual combat conditions. His voice carried the authority of someone who had trained numerous soldiers and had strong opinions about the difference between range, performance, and battlefield effectiveness. Elena began her pre-shot routine, a systematic process that she had refined through countless hours of training and real-world application. She checked her scope settings, verified her shooting position, and began studying the environmental conditions that would affect her shot. To the casual observer, these preparations might have seemed excessive for a simple range demonstration, but experienced shooters recognized the signs of someone who took every shot seriously. The 800-meter target that Elena had selected was barely visible to most of the spectators, appearing as a small white square against the brown backdrop of the range's far end. Standard military rifles were considered effective at such distances, but achieving consistent accuracy required exceptional skill, perfect equipment, and ideal conditions. The afternoon wind was creating visible movement in the grass between the firing line and the target, adding another layer of complexity to an already challenging shot. Elena studied the wind indicators methodically, watching the grass movement and noting the subtle changes in wind direction and intensity. She had learned to read environmental conditions like a language, understanding how each factor would affect her bullet's flight path. The skill required years to develop and could mean the difference between mission success and failure in combat situations. Thompson's commentary shifted to the technical aspects of long-range shooting, explaining to the gathered soldiers how wind drift, bullet drop, and scope adjustment worked together to make such shots nearly impossible for average marksmen. He used the opportunity to reinforce his earlier points about the importance of realistic expectations and proper training progression. Elena loaded a single round into her rifle's chamber, the metallic sound of the bolt action crisp and decisive in the relatively quiet atmosphere of the range. She settled behind her scope, her breathing becoming controlled and rhythmic. The crowd grew quieter as they sensed that the moment of truth was approaching, and even Thompson's commentary faded to silence. Through her scope, Elena could see the target clearly, the magnification bringing the distant white square into sharp focus. She noted the mirage rising from the heated ground between her position and the target, a shimmer that would affect the apparent position of her aiming point. Compensating for mirage was an advanced skill that separated expert marksmen from competent shooters. Elena's breathing settled into the pattern that had become automatic after years of training. She took a deep breath, released half of it, and held the remainder while her crosshairs settled on the target. Her finger found the trigger, applying pressure gradually and consistently while maintaining perfect sight alignment. The rifle seemed to become an extension of her body as she prepared to fire. The shot broke with a sharp crack that echoed across the range. Elena maintained her position behind the scope, following through with the shot and watching for impact. Through her magnification, she could see the small puff of dust that marked where her bullet had struck the target, even before the range safety officer could confirm the hit through his spotting scope. Elena knew she had achieved a center hit. The range safety officer's announcement of a bullseye hit at 800 meters drew surprised murmurs from the crowd. Soldiers who had been skeptical of Elena's capabilities began to reassess their assumptions, while those who had suspected there was more to her story felt vindicated. Lieutenant Thompson's expression showed confusion rather than admiration, as if he was struggling to reconcile what he had witnessed with his earlier assessment. Elena fired 4 more rounds in quick succession, each shot carefully aimed and deliberately placed. The sound of her rifle had developed a rhythm that spoke of confidence and control. She wasn't rushing her shots, but neither was she taking excessive time between rounds. Her pace suggested someone who was accustomed to making critical shots under time pressure. The range safety officer announced the results of Elena's 5-shot group. All 5 rounds had struck within a 4-inch circle at 800 meters. This level of accuracy was exceptional under any circumstances, but particularly impressive for a demonstration shot on an unfamiliar range, with observers watching every movement. The crowd's reaction shifted from polite attention to genuine amazement. Thompson's commentary had stopped entirely as he struggled to process what he was witnessing. 5 consecutive bullseye hits at maximum range was not the performance he had expected from someone whose equipment looked like it belonged in a surplus store. He found himself questioning his initial assessment while trying to maintain his authority. In front of the assembled soldiers, Elena began packing her rifle away with the same methodical care she had shown during preparation. Her movements were economical and purposeful, showing no signs of excitement or satisfaction over her performance. To her, these shots were well within her normal capabilities, and she treated them as routine rather than extraordinary. Several soldiers approached Elena to congratulate her on the impressive shooting display. They peppered her with questions about her training, her equipment, and her experience. Elena answered politely but briefly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention her performance had generated. She had not intended to show off, merely to demonstrate that Thompson's assumptions about her capabilities were incorrect. The range safety officer, who had observed thousands of soldiers over his career, made his way over to Elena with genuine interest. He complimented her shooting and asked about her background, recognizing immediately that her skills were far beyond those of a typical soldier. His experienced eye had caught subtle details in her technique that marked her as someone with extensive specialized training. Lieutenant Thompson stood somewhat apart from the group surrounding Elena, clearly processing the dramatic reversal of his expectations. The soldier he had publicly criticized for substandard equipment had just delivered a shooting performance that exceeded anything he had seen from his own unit members. His authority had been challenged not by words or arguments, but by undeniable demonstration of superior skill. As the crowd of soldiers continued to buzz with amazement over Elena's shooting performance, Lieutenant Thompson found himself in an increasingly uncomfortable position. His morning confidence had been replaced by confusion and a growing sense that he had made a serious error in judgment. The worn rifle case that had triggered his initial criticism now seemed to tell a completely different story, one that spoke of extensive field experience rather than neglect. Elena finished securing her rifle and began closing the case that had been the source of so much controversy. As she worked, Thompson noticed details he had missed during his morning inspection. The wear patterns on the leather were consistent with someone who had carried the case through challenging terrain, and the makeshift repairs showed the ingenuity of someone who maintained their equipment under field conditions rather than in comfortable base workshops. The range safety officer approached Thompson with a thoughtful expression. As someone who had observed military marksmanship for over 2 decades, he recognized exceptional skill when he saw it, and Elena's performance had been truly outstanding. He mentioned quietly to Thompson that such shooting ability typically came from specialized training and extensive combat experience, suggesting that there might be more to Elena's background than was immediately apparent. Thompson's mind raced as he tried to reconcile his initial assessment with the reality of what he had just witnessed. He had built his reputation on his ability to evaluate soldiers quickly and accurately, and his morning judgment had been dramatically wrong. The implications went beyond simple embarrassment. His credibility with his subordinates was now in question. Elena stood and shouldered her rifle case, preparing to leave the range. Several soldiers were still asking questions about her shooting technique and equipment, but she was clearly ready to conclude the demonstration. Her demeanor remained modest and professional, showing no signs of triumph or satisfaction over having proven Thompson wrong so decisively. Thompson realized that he needed to salvage something from the situation, both for his own reputation and for the morale of the soldiers who had witnessed the entire confrontation. He approached Elena with what he hoped was a gracious expression, prepared to acknowledge her exceptional performance and move forward professionally. However, as Thompson drew closer to Elena, something caught his eye that made him stop abruptly. On the side of her rifle case, partially obscured by wear and dirt, was a military insignia that he had not noticed during his morning inspection. The insignia was small and might easily be overlooked by someone conducting a casual examination, but Thompson's training had taught him to recognize military decorations and unit identifications. The insignia showed a distinctive design that Thompson recognized but had never seen in person. It was the marking of a military sniper school, but more specifically, it indicated achievement at an advanced level that few soldiers ever reached. The numbers beneath the insignia made Thompson's blood run cold as he realized their significance. The number 2875 was engraved beneath the sniper insignia, and Thompson's military training helped him understand its meaning immediately. This was not just a graduation marker or unit identifier. It was a record of confirmed long-range eliminations. Elena had made 2,075 confirmed sniper kills during her military service, a number that placed her among the most lethal marksmen in military history. Thompson's face went pale as the full implications of the insignia sank in. He had spent the morning publicly criticizing and humiliating one of the most accomplished snipers in the entire military. The worn rifle case that he had mocked as substandard was actually the equipment of someone whose combat record was legendary among those who knew how to read the signs. Elena noticed Thompson's sudden change in expression and followed his gaze to the insignia on her case. She realized that he had finally seen the marking that told the real story of her service record. Her expression remained neutral, but there was a subtle shift in her posture that suggested she was prepared for whatever reaction might follow. The soldiers, who had been celebrating Elena's shooting performance, were unaware of the drama playing out between her and Thompson. They continued their conversations about marksmanship technique and equipment, oblivious to the fact that they were in the presence of someone whose combat achievements were extraordinary even by military standards. Thompson struggled to find words as he processed the reality of Elena's background. The number on her case represented not just exceptional skill, but years of combat service in the most dangerous and demanding role the military had to offer. Each of those 2,875 confirmed kills represented a situation where Elena's accuracy had meant the difference between mission success and failure, between life and death for the soldiers she had protected. Elena finally broke the silence, speaking quietly so that only Thompson could hear. She explained that her equipment showed wear because it had been used extensively in combat situations where replacement parts and perfect maintenance facilities were not available. She had learned to care for her rifle under conditions that would challenge even the most dedicated soldiers, and the case's appearance reflected that reality. Thompson realized that his morning criticism had not only been wrong, but had actually been directed at equipment that had saved countless lives in combat. The makeshift repairs and worn appearance that he had interpreted as carelessness were actually evidence of resourcefulness and dedication under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. Elena continued, speaking in the same quiet tone, explaining that she preferred not to discuss her service record because it tended to create uncomfortable situations exactly like the one they were now experiencing. She had hoped to integrate into the unit quietly and contribute her skills without drawing attention to her background, but Thompson's public challenge had made that impossible. Thompson's mind raced as he considered the implications of his mistake. Not only had he embarrassed himself in front of his soldiers, but he had also potentially damaged relations with someone whose skills and experience could be invaluable to the unit. The morning's events had revealed his own limitations as a leader and evaluator of personnel. The afternoon sun was beginning to cast longer shadows across the range, and the crowd of spectators was starting to disperse. However, the conversation between Elena and Thompson was far from over, and both knew that the morning's confrontation had created a situation that would need to be addressed carefully and professionally. Lieutenant Thompson stood frozen as the full weight of his mistake settled over him. The number 2,875 seemed to burn in his vision, representing a level of combat achievement that he had only heard about in military legends. Elena Petrov was not just an accomplished sniper. She was one of the most lethal precision marksmen in the entire armed forces, and he had spent the morning treating her like a recruit with substandard equipment. Elena waited patiently for Thompson's response, her expression remaining professionally neutral despite the dramatic shift in the situation. She had been through similar revelations before, when officers or fellow soldiers discovered her true background after making initial assumptions based on her appearance or demeanor. She understood that such moments were often more difficult for the other person than for herself. Thompson finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. He asked Elena to confirm what the insignia meant, hoping against reason that he had misunderstood its significance. Elena nodded quietly, explaining that the number represented confirmed eliminations over the course of multiple deployments in various theaters of operation. The range was nearly empty now, with most of the spectators having departed after Elena's impressive shooting demonstration. The few remaining soldiers were packing up their equipment and preparing to leave, unaware of the intense conversation taking place between Elena and Thompson. The late afternoon quiet seemed to amplify the significance of their discussion. Thompson's mind flooded with questions about Elena's service record, her training, and the circumstances that had led to such an extraordinary combat history. However, he also realized that his position had fundamentally changed from that morning's confident authority figure to someone who needed to rebuild his credibility and establish a new working relationship with Elena. Elena could see the struggle playing out on Thompson's face and decided to help ease the situation. She explained that her preference was to focus on current duties rather than past achievements, and that she hoped they could move forward professionally. Her tone was gracious but also made it clear that she expected the respect that her experience and record had earned. Thompson nodded, recognizing both the olive branch Elena was offering and the implicit expectation that their relationship would be different going forward. He began to formulate an apology, but Elena gently interrupted, suggesting that actions would be more meaningful than words in rebuilding their professional relationship. The conversation was interrupted by the approach of the base commander, Colonel Harrison, who had heard about the afternoon shooting demonstration and wanted to speak with Elena personally. Thompson's heart sank as he realized that his morning confrontation with Elena was about to receive attention from the highest levels of command. Colonel Harrison was a veteran officer with over 25 years of service, who prided himself on knowing the backgrounds of exceptional soldiers under his command. As he approached Elena, his demeanor suggested that he was already aware of her reputation and service record. His presence immediately elevated the significance of the situation. Elena came to attention as the colonel approached, her military bearing crisp and professional. Colonel Harrison returned her salute and then surprised both Elena and Thompson by asking to examine Elena's rifle case. Elena complied with the request, opening the case to reveal her precisely maintained equipment. The colonel studied Elena's rifle with the appreciation of someone who understood the craftsmanship and modification work that had gone into creating such a precision instrument. He asked technical questions about the scope, the barrel modifications, and the ammunition Elena preferred for long-range work. His questions demonstrated knowledge that went well beyond casual interest. Thompson watched the exchange with growing unease, realizing that the colonel's visit was not a coincidence. Harrison's detailed knowledge of Elena's equipment and his familiarity with advanced marksmanship techniques suggested that he had been briefed on Elena's background. Before her arrival at the base, Colonel Harrison then turned his attention to Thompson, his expression serious but not hostile. He asked for Thompson's assessment of Elena's capabilities based on the afternoon's demonstration, clearly giving the lieutenant an opportunity to redeem himself after the morning's poor judgment. Thompson struggled to find appropriate words, knowing that his response would be crucial for his future relationship with both Elena and the colonel. He acknowledged that Elena's performance had exceeded his expectations and that he had clearly underestimated her capabilities based on superficial observations. The colonel nodded thoughtfully at Thompson's response, then surprised both soldiers by revealing that Elena's transfer to their unit had been specifically requested for an upcoming mission that would require her unique skills. Her presence was not a random assignment but a deliberate placement based on anticipated operational needs. Elena's expression showed mild surprise at this revelation, suggesting that she had not been fully briefed on the reasons for her transfer. Colonel Harrison explained that intelligence reports had identified potential targets that would require precision engagement at extreme ranges, and Elena's proven capabilities made her the obvious choice for the assignment. Thompson felt his stomach drop as he realized that his morning criticism had been directed at someone who had been specifically selected for her exceptional abilities. The worn equipment that he had mocked was actually the tools of someone whose skills were considered essential for mission success. Colonel Harrison addressed Thompson directly, emphasizing that successful military operations depended on leaders who could accurately assess the capabilities of their personnel. He made it clear that snap judgments based on appearances could compromise mission effectiveness and endanger lives. His tone was educational rather than punitive, but the message was unmistakable. Elena remained quietly professional throughout the colonel's comments, neither gloating over Thompson's discomfort nor attempting to minimize the significance of the morning's events. Her behavior demonstrated the kind of mature leadership that came from extensive combat experience and the confidence of proven accomplishment. The colonel concluded his visit by assigning Elena to Thompson's unit officially, making it clear that Thompson would be responsible for integrating her capabilities into their operational planning. The assignment was presented as an opportunity for Thompson to learn from Elena's experience, rather than as a punishment for his earlier poor judgment. As Colonel Harrison departed, Thompson and Elena found themselves alone on the now empty shooting range. The afternoon's events had completely transformed their relationship, and both knew that they would need to establish new ground rules for working together effectively. The challenge would be moving beyond the morning's confrontation to build a productive professional partnership. 3 weeks after the shooting range incident, Lieutenant Thompson stood in the pre-dawn darkness preparing for the mission that would define both his leadership and his relationship with Elena Petrov. The intelligence reports had proven accurate, and their unit was being deployed to neutralize high-value targets that conventional forces could not reach. Elena's specialized skills were no longer theoretical assets but critical requirements for mission success. Thompson had spent the intervening weeks learning to work with Elena, gradually developing an appreciation for her methodical approach and professional expertise. She had quietly integrated into the unit, sharing her knowledge with other soldiers while maintaining the humble demeanor that had initially masked her extraordinary capabilities. The worn rifle case that had triggered their first confrontation had become a symbol of experience. Rather than neglect, Elena prepared her equipment, with the same careful attention to detail that Thompson had witnessed on the shooting range. Each piece of gear was checked, double-checked, and arranged with precision born of years of combat experience. Her pre-mission routine was methodical and thorough, leaving nothing to chance when lives would depend on her accuracy. The mission briefing had been sobering. Intelligence had identified 3 enemy commanders operating from fortified positions in mountainous terrain that made conventional assault impossible. The targets were positioned at ranges exceeding 1 to 200 meters, with challenging environmental conditions that would test even Elena's proven abilities. Mission success would depend entirely on her capacity to make precision shots under combat pressure. Thompson had initially struggled with the tactical planning required to support Elena's mission. His training had focused on leading conventional infantry operations, and sniper support required different logistics, positioning, and security considerations. Elena had patiently helped him understand the requirements for effective long-range engagement, sharing insights gained through years of similar operations. The team moved through the darkness toward their assigned position, Elena carrying the same worn rifle case that had caused such controversy weeks earlier. Thompson now understood that the case's appearance told the story of countless missions, where Elena's skills had made the difference between success and failure. The scuffs and wear marks were badges of honor rather than signs of neglect. As they reached their observation point, Elena began her systematic assessment of the tactical situation. She studied the terrain, wind conditions, and target positions with the methodical precision that Thompson had learned to respect. Her calculations were complex, accounting for factors that most soldiers never considered, but her confidence in the process was absolute. Thompson coordinated with the support elements while Elena prepared her firing position. The operation required precise timing and flawless execution, with no margin for error or second chances. Elena's role was critical, but success also depended on Thompson's ability to provide effective command and control under pressure. Elena's first shot eliminated the primary target at 1,247 meters, a precision strike that immediately changed the tactical situation on the ground. Her second shot, taken less than 30 seconds later, neutralized the backup commander before enemy forces could respond effectively. The third target attempted to flee but was eliminated by Elena's final shot at a range of 1,189 meters. The mission's success exceeded all expectations, with enemy resistance collapsing immediately following the elimination of their leadership. Thompson's tactical coordination had been flawless, and Elena's marksmanship had been devastating in its precision and effectiveness. The combination of her specialized skills and his leadership had created a highly effective team. During the extraction, Thompson reflected on how dramatically his understanding of military effectiveness had changed since that first morning at the rifle range. Elena's quiet professionalism and proven capabilities had taught him that true military excellence often came disguised in unexpected packages. The most dangerous soldiers were not always the loudest or most aggressive. Elena secured her rifle in the worn case that had started their relationship on such a difficult note. Thompson now saw the case as a symbol of dedication and experience rather than neglect. The wear patterns told stories of missions accomplished and lives saved, representing a level of service that few soldiers would ever achieve. Back at the base, word of the mission's success spread quickly through the ranks. Soldiers who had witnessed the shooting range confrontation now understood the full context of what they had observed. Elena's demonstration, had not been showing off but rather a glimpse into capabilities that would soon prove essential. For mission success, Thompson submitted his after-action report with genuine appreciation for Elena's contribution to the mission's success. He acknowledged that his initial assessment had been wrong, and that Elena's presence had elevated the unit's capabilities significantly. His recommendations emphasized the importance of looking beyond surface appearances when evaluating personnel. Colonel Harrison reviewed Thompson's report with satisfaction, noting the lieutenant's professional growth and Elena's continued excellence. The successful mission validated the decision to assign Elena to Thompson's unit and demonstrated the value of combining different types of expertise for complex operations. Elena continued her quiet service, maintaining her equipment with the same meticulous care that had always characterized her approach. The rifle case that had once been a source of controversy now served as a reminder to everyone in the unit that true military effectiveness came from skill, experience, and dedication rather than appearance or assumptions. Thompson had learned one of the most important lessons of his military career. Never judge a soldier's capabilities based on superficial observations. Elena's worn equipment had told the story of extensive combat experience. Not neglect, and her quiet confidence had been earned through years of proven performance under the most challenging conditions. The partnership between Thompson and Elena became a model for effective military cooperation, demonstrating how respect, professionalism, and recognition of individual strengths could create highly effective teams. Their successful collaboration would influence both of their careers and set new standards for integrated operations within their command. Years later, Thompson would tell new officers about the morning he laughed at a worn rifle case and the lesson he learned about the difference between appearance and reality in military service. Elena's story became part of the base's informal history, reminding everyone that the most extraordinary soldiers often looked perfectly ordinary until the moment when their exceptional skills were needed most.